Recently, I flew internationally through a global pandemic. A lady yells out to this couple, I agree with him, saying like, yeah, I'm not gonna wear my mask. Oh, being a gangster is cool, unless you're an Arab. If you're an Arab, anti-vax parents should be charged with child abuse. Why? And this may surprise you, but it's not because of the child endangerment that they are putting their child through. That's not why. Not because of the child endangerment part, not because it's probably going to kill their child in the end, their child's going to live into 4. That's not why. Welcome back to the Erratic podcast. Recently, I flew internationally through a global pandemic, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about what that was like. Also, I'd like to put this out here really quick. The reason that there's been a lack of uploads for the past couple of weeks is due to the fact that I actually left my computer at the LAX airport at security, and currently they have shut down their lost and found department, and they are not responding to my emails. So I'm working on getting back my computer to be able to edit these videos. We'll see. I may not have a computer to edit on for the next week or two, but hopefully after I get my computer, the uploads will become more consistent, more frequent, all that stuff. So yeah. So back what I was talking about. First of all, I was living in Turkey for the past like 3 months or so. We were flying out of Turkey into the United States through LAX. It was very interesting to see actually how as we flew through our trip, the level of people wearing masks decreased. So starting from the town that we were in Turkey, there was, everyone was wearing a mask. If you weren't wearing a mask, they were coming up to you in the airport saying, hey, you can't do this. As we walked into the airport, our temperatures were taken at the door. Then we were forced. We were said, hey, before you enter the building, go use a hand sanitizer. I was trying to walk around. The lady was like, nah, bro, you need to go use the hand sanitizer. Anytime someone was in the airport, just waiting in the lounge or whatever, and someone wasn't wearing their mask, if they were not wearing it for long enough, an official would come up to them and say, hey, bro, you need to put up your mask. And so everyone would do that. Then moving on from there to the Istanbul airport, I would say that there's an equal level of people probably wearing masks. There were more people who were like doing this entire thing, like just letting it chill around here. One interesting part of this kind of mask culture that, is originally orienting in large Asian countries that kind of the rest of the world is adapting now is the chin hang. And it's right here. I'm seeing people all the time, and it's like, this is essentially the interaction that happens. You realize it doesn't do anything when it's down here. It's like not even covering your face, your lips. It's not, you realize when it's down here, it's not doing anything, right? Yeah. It's just like kind of a fashion statement, you know what I mean? It's just kind of here, like a neck caterpillar, if you will. But the entire purpose of the mask is that it's a face covering, and you're just leaving it on your neck, and it's not actually performing anything, because the purpose doesn't even have any point being on your face. You're just holding it around your neck down here. It's not even, it's not even on the mouth. The entire purpose of it is like, covering the mouth, and it's not on the mouth. Therefore, it doesn't actually have any purpose being on your face. It doesn't make sense. Why are you wearing the mask if it's just, you're just holding it around your neck down here? It's supposed to be on your face, on your mouth, on your neck. There's no point for it being, why are you wearing it otherwise? There's no point of it being on your face. No, it's just, it's kind of here. It's like it's kind of like a fashion statement, you know what I mean? It's just kind of like, it's just hanging out in this area. It's in this region. It's like just kind of part of the cultural norms, It's like saying, hey, I'm being careful, I'm being thoughtful, but, it's like I need to breathe sometimes, you know what I'm saying? So it's like just kind of hold it a little bit down here, like, so I can talk and stuff and get a breath of fresh air. Like, I haven't been wearing it like this for the past 4.5 hours. That's not what was happening. They just put it up and down every now and then. That's all that's happening here, you know what I mean? So it is interesting to see that entire kind of mask culture developing. Not gonna lie, that was me 95% of the time. I was the neck mask guy. I was, get some of that fresh air, but it is interesting. Kind of like, is the mask really a medical item, or has it become now a cultural item and a sign of cultural respect or conformity to cultural norms? Anyway, so going through the Istanbul airport, which is currently one of the largest airports in the world, technically possibly the largest, but I don't believe it's the largest in terms of the amount of space that's in the airport, but it's the largest in the capacity of passengers on an annual basis that can go through that airport without, overwhelming the entire facility. Currently in China, they're actually working to build a larger airport that's going to surpass the Istanbul airport, and they announced that a couple of years after the, kind of completion of the Istanbul airport. It's an incredible airport, the Istanbul airport. I haven't seen the Beijing airport. It's an architectural masterpiece. I don't need to up them too much, but it's really cool. It's massive. Is it worth the amount of money? Probably no. But anyway, it's very impressive, massive ceilings, and it's bustling most of the time. It can house so many people, and honestly, it never looks that full because of how ridiculously massive it is, but it is oftentimes very full. However, during the pandemic, It looks like a ghost town completely. Everything is plastic up. You know, there's tumbleweeds, metaphorical tumbleweeds going throughout the airport, and it just looks completely different, completely barren. 95% of the shops or like eating stores were closed. There was one that was open out of the however many, 30, 40, 100, I don't know. And then there was some vending machines opening to be able to get a water or whatever. And then as we were on the plane from Istanbul to LAX, everyone was told that they had to wear the mask on the plane. So for both of our flights on Turkish Airlines that were both from our town in Turkey to Istanbul, then Istanbul to LAX, we were given these little packets, hygiene kits, if you will. So let's just open this up here. Let's experience this together, okay? Can I set this back here so you can see me easier? Cool. Bruh. Okay, so opening up this little hygiene packet or whatever. Bruh, it's not opening. Let's experience the hygiene together, okay? We're gonna be so clean after this, bro. It's gonna be insane. Okay, so pulling out the hygiene kit here, we have this little whatever thing, instructional thing that tells us how to use it. Then we have our little mask. We have a freaking antiseptic wipe, very nice. You can use before. Come on, if it focuses, I'm gonna be so impressed. Oh my goodness, look at that! It actually focuses on its own. Insane, bruh. Insane. Here, I bet no, you know what I can do? I can do that. Yeah, that works, kind of. So we've got that little thing to use. I don't know, I guess for the people who are gonna, they wipe down the trays for you, but they recommend that you actually wipe down the trays yourself for some, I don't know. Another antiseptic wipe, I guess, for the different times you eat. Then you've got a little nifty mask in here. Oh my goodness, it's so epic. By the way, we had masks when we went on the plane, so we technically didn't need these, and you can't even, it just broke. It literally, cool, you know what, epic, very epic. 10 out of 10. Anyway, most people's didn't break, I don't think. Smells like a Chinese factory, very nice. Got a little mask to put on there, and you're supposed to, wear those if you don't have one. Also, technically, you're supposed to replace most masks every 4 hours. So, for individuals who came on the plane, it was, ended up being like a 14-hour flight. So to the individuals, who only brought one mask on the flight, then they were technically supposed to change them. Now, that was the time we were living in Turkey to Istanbul to the LAX flights. LAX was desolate. I've been through LAX like 3 or 4 times. Way more like it was a ghost town, bro. So after our initial 2 flights, we only had 2 more flights left. So it was gonna be LAX to Denver and then Denver on to Omaha. Both of these flights were on United Airlines. Now the first flight, I would say after you get to LAX, the amount of people that have their masks off goes from like 5%, and even then it's only like having it around their neck some of the time in the Istanbul airport or whatever on the plane. Now suddenly in LAX, 10 to 20% maybe have their masks off altogether, in the sense that they don't even have the masks around their neck. They're just, they're off in their backpack or whatever, because I don't think you're allowed in the airport if you do not have a mask of some form. It was interesting listening to the loudspeakers at the LAX airport talking about the fact that only individuals who are either working at the airport, have some kind of essential role for the functioning of the airport, who are travelers at the airport, or who are dropping off travelers at the airport, those are the only ones eligible to go into the airport at LAX. They were constantly making announcements at LAX that all people who do not fall into those 3 categories are liable to, get arrested and escorted off the premises or charged with some kind of, I don't know, criminal activity. And I'm just thinking about, like, what about all the homeless dudes in the airport who are, just there to have a roof over the head? Maybe homelessness is prosecuted in these cities anyway, which is insane. How can you prosecute homelessness? It doesn't make any sense. You're poor, jail. And that's the reality, that was a part of the history of this country. Those who were not able to pay their debts off were often put into prison, which makes absolutely no sense from the perspective of, if you're in prison, how are you going to be able to pay off your debts? Whatever. On the LAX to Denver flight, the flight attendants were no longer in hazmat suits. However, they were wearing masks at all times. I would say that there was a couple of people on that flight who would occasionally take their masks off. It wasn't a big deal. No one was like too super hyper about it, but I would say the vast majority, 90-95% of everyone was wearing a mask at almost all times on that flight. Now, going to the Denver airport was bustling. There were people absolutely everywhere, and I would say that maybe 20% of them were not wearing masks. Is it a big deal? Whatever, who cares? But that's just the reality of what it was like and going around there. Obviously, I'm sure they did have masks to be able to get into the airport, but they didn't even have them around their neck. I was even listening to a couple of conversations, a husband and wife who were passing by, and the wife was berating the husband who was not wearing his mask, and then a lady who is sitting over at, one of the not terminals, a gate. One of the ladies who was sitting at a gate yells out to this couple in support of the husband, saying like, yeah, I'm not gonna wear my mask and blah, 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 whatever. I agree with him, something, and vocalizing that support for him, not wearing the mask. And then, the person that she was sitting there in the airport and the person who was sitting across from her at that gate kind of had this entire conversation about the mask culture that is starting up in America and the people who are for it. Bruh. And the people who are for it and the people who are against it, and oftentimes the cultural clashes that are being created because of this entire new, pandemic paradigm that we are now living in. Then I would say the Denver to Omaha flight, 1 out of 4 people was not wearing masks. And it wasn't a big deal. In the Omaha airport, there were plenty of people who were not wearing masks. In fact, I would say that the majority of personnel working at the Omaha airport are not wearing masks, which isn't terribly surprising. For whatever reason, oftentimes these seemingly bipartisan issues, but not bipartisan, these personal choices that we all make are somehow politicized and saying it's not a personal choice, it's a political choice. And, who cares? It's whatever. Obviously, there are going to be those who argue, it is a political choice, but it is interesting to see how oftentimes the choice to wear a mask or not to wear a mask, for whatever reason, instead of being a personality thing, it ends up being a political thing, and the choice to wear a mask or not to wear a mask is divided down that conservative versus more liberal line. Interesting, I did conservative on the left, liberal on the right, but whatever. So yeah, like I said, it's not necessarily surprising that the majority of the employees who are living in Omaha and even a good portion of the employees working at the airports in Denver were not wearing any sort of masks whatsoever. Not like they were flaunting it or going up and coughing in people's faces, but it's just the reality. They made their choice and that's fine. That's their personal choice. Or I assume it's their personal choice and it's not enforced by their employer. I'm not entirely sure of that. It is definitely interesting to see like the de-escalating fear levels. The first flight we were in Turkey, it was semi-tense. Istanbul to LAX flight, you could just slice the tension in the air with a knife. All of the flight attendants were in full hazmat suits. They weren't giving service, their normal meals. I would say the Turkish Airlines probably has some of the best airplane food in the world, and they weren't even giving out, their normal meals or any kind of hot meal. Rather, they kind of just threw, okay, slight exaggeration, threw this plastic bag full of sandwiches at you and like, hey, there you go, buddy, you're good now. But it was definitely interesting, yeah, that, how this entire new pandemic paradigm has transformed kind of the way that they do hospitality on Turkish Airlines. It's kind of interesting for me to watch, how young people, far less likelihood of dying from the virus. Old people, far higher likelihood of dying of the virus, right? But the old people are the exact ones who aren't worried. The young people, probably not going to die, probably going to be just fine, are the ones who are like, oh my goodness, blah, 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 afraid. And yet the old people are like, probably going to die if they get it. They're like, whatever happens, happens. I would say that's the majority of old people that I've seen. The majority of old people are, not that concerned. But it's very interesting for me to watch the old people who are concerned, because it's not about being afraid of the virus. It's about being afraid of dying. Think about, myself as a young guy who statistically probably has a very long time to live. Maybe, who knows. But I am far less afraid of dying than someone who's in their 60s or 80s. And I don't know, it's kind of counterintuitive to me. A little sad, maybe. Not like sad in a condescending sense, but sad in a like, I just wish that, people could come to, it's hard to watch when people can't come to terms with their own mortality, and that's like a large part of their, daily anxiety or fear. I remember there was definitely a time in my life where that was like an issue for me until I just realized that life is kind of a lot more trouble than it's worth. I feel like all the people who are so worried about dying from the coronavirus, the irony of it all is that it would be a lot easier if you just went. Like the amount of incredible, and this is speaking from someone who has lived an incredibly privileged life, and yet despite living an incredibly privileged life, I don't want to have to deal with the constant grind of going to work every single day, doing all these things in life that are so miserable to you, or could be so miserable to you, and are so heart-wrenching, and yet people still have the desire to fight on and live. I think a lot of it has to deal with the fact that people hold on to something harder when it's being taken away from them, right? In the same way that, someone who's in the military probably has a higher desire to live than someone, who has no threat to their life whatsoever. Because when someone is trying to actively take your life away from you, you know, have a different value on like what life is and what life is meant to be in general. Honestly, I just think we kind of need to make peace with this entire situation, realize that even if this is not the reality we want to live in, this is the reality of the paradigm that we are in, and that until we get a vaccine, you know, this is kind of how life is right now. Speaking of vaccines, it'll be really interesting to see how the anti-vax community responds to the coronavirus vaccine when it comes out. Honestly, I've been thinking about something for a really long time. It's the reality that anti-vax is child abuse, okay? Listen, hear me out right now, hear me out. Anti-vax parents should be charged with child abuse. Why? And this may surprise you, but it's not because of the child endangerment that they are putting their child through by causing their child to be completely unprepared for the plethora of incredibly dangerous diseases that are out there in the world. That's not why. Not because of the child endangerment part, not because it's probably going to kill their child in the end, you know, their child's going to live until 4. That's not why. It's because they've subjected their children to so much bullying. You know, right now there's a pandemic going on around the world. It's called coronavirus, but there's another pandemic among the young white suburban community, and it's called depression. The amount of depression that has been caused by the bullying for being the child of an anti-vax parent is unbelievable. Hey, they might have depression, but at least they don't have autism. Well, you know what? They don't have autism, but they have depression. And smallpox, but mainly depression. It's interesting to see how like different segments of a given population will see a certain like cultural norm or a certain movement in a certain light and will see it a certain way, but another segment of the population will see it in a completely separate way. And whether that's, you know, positive or negative. In a certain context, a given cause is good, but in another context, that cause is bad. It kind of makes me think about, you know, the entire anti-vax movement and how, you know, there's a certain segment of the population that, you know, upholds this as this incredible thing, and you know how we need to save the planet, blah, 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 our children from autism, and then another segment of the population, those other people look at them like complete buffoons and fools and idiots. And it kind of makes me think about how, you know, there's an entire culture built around being a quote, bro, this sounds so white. Not white, but like a cringe soy boy. I guess that's synonymous with white now, maybe. Anyway, but it's interesting to see how a certain segment of the population views like being a gangster as this, you know, incredible, like romanticized thing, you know, right? It has this entire culture built around it. The entire rap community is built on the foundation of being gangster, you know, pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, doing whatever illegal activity you have to do to provide for your family. And, you know, against all odds, the come up in the world, just totally ignoring everyone else's opinions of you and any laws that may pertain to you and just powering through to overcome, right? That's one perspective, but another one is, you know, these lawless degenerates selling drugs, bad for community, bad on families, blah, 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 blah. And that's an entire other perspective on this given segment of the culture. But it's interesting to see how being a gangster is cool unless you're an Arab. If you're an Arab, that's unacceptable. Now you're committing a war crime. Now you're a Terry, right? You're a terrorist. Terrorist. The original international gangsters. Bruh, there's this song, who is it by? There's a song by Tekashi 6ix9ine and some other dudes. International Gangster. Bruh, if Tekashi 6ix9ine was Arab and not Mexican, bam, terrorist. Oh, unacceptable. Tekashi 6ix9ine, I don't know what the song is. International Gangster, blah, blah, blah. Everyone's driving out. But if you're an Arab, bam, oh my god, arrest this guy, shoot this guy. It's just interesting to see, you know, how we perceive, you know, one action or one kind of idea in a given cultural context as being okay, and then suddenly if it's in another cultural context, it's totally unacceptable. I don't know, that's just really funny to me. Kind of just seeing, you know, how our molds, how our lines that we draw in the sand, you know, this is acceptable, this is unacceptable, how they shift depending on who's talking about it or who's doing it. It's interesting kind of, you know, just thinking about this entire fascination with Tekashi 6ix9ine, or, you know, these people who are glorified as being, you know, these incredible, fascinating, tough individuals who are, you know, put on display before, you know, young men in our culture as being like the model of like what cool is or what success is. And there's this entire trend in movies, all the heist movies, all the thieves and robbers, they're the protagonists, not only talking about that, but also kind of taking the monsters and like making them the good guys, the protagonists or whatever. Why is it that we have this obsession with the supposed villains? You know, why do we love hate? Why do we love hate? Why do we love the bad guy. I've been thinking about it for a couple of days and I kind of have a little bit of a thought on it. I think it's because villains are inherently more interesting than the good guys. And here's how I came to this conclusion. Think about it with me. The majority of what comprises being good is the absence of action, whereas the majority of what comprises being bad is the presence of inappropriate or wrong action, right? The majority of what comprises being good is the absence of action, right? The absence of bad action, whereas the majority of what comprises being bad is the presence of action. So it's the presence of bad action. And so it's just way easier to make a movie on someone who is actively doing things, whereas, you know, it's a movie on, oh, there was a guy and he could have robbed the store, but he chose not to. There was this guy and he could have stolen money from his company, but he chose not to. Or, oh, there was this guy and there was a little kid walking down the street with his mom and the guy chose not to kill the little kid and his mom. He could have, but he chose not to. That's not as interesting of a movie. You know, it's not as easy to make that interesting as it is easy to make someone actively going out and doing bad things, but you know, they have some good within them, or you know, there's some kind of inner conflict to match the outer conflict and chaos that is happening because of their evil actions. And I think there obviously are movies where the good guys are actively doing things, right? But the amount of scenarios where you can have a good guy actively doing something to promote good, whereas the amount of scenarios that you have a good guy promoting good by doing nothing, by just the absence of doing bad things, I think that's kind of the reason the villains or the bad guys have now been romanticized in the media and kind of movies and whatnot, just because they're inherently more interesting. Or rather, maybe it's easier just to make an interesting movie about them because they're doing more. I don't know. It's interesting. I don't know. It's interesting to think about. All right, I think that's going to be it for this Erratic podcast. I don't know if it's really even a podcast technically, due to the fact that sometimes they end up being shorter and more edited than, you know, an actual podcast is. But I think it's just, you know, one of the realities of the attention span. I mean, you know, a fault of this, like, bro, if someone's not talking fast or if there's not jump cuts, I'm skipping through because I don't care that much about what you're saying, okay? And so, you know, I think it's just a matter of, like, having valid things to say or entertaining things to say, and not only having entertaining subjects, but also, you know, making it an entertaining or watchable format. And so, yeah, I don't know if this really even qualifies as a podcast, but whatever. That's what it's being called for now, anyway. Okay, thank you guys so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day, week, and whatnot. And yeah, think for yourselves, bro. That's a powerful lesson. Think for yourself. Because if you don't think for yourself, other people will think for you. See you guys.